Welcome.
I'm Cavan Scott, one of the story architects of Star Wars: The High Republic.
This is Dominic Pace, who plays Gekko the Bounty Hunter from The Mandalorian.
Hi, I'm Claudia Gray. I write Star Wars books.
And you're listening.
And you are listening
to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
And here we are for yet another Kenobi discussion show. So we are talking about part 5 of the Kenobi series, and this is the 4th episode we have done of this great discussion show on the feed of Comics in Motion, and it is going to be on my YouTube channel as well. And this time I'm joined by another 2 wonderful individuals who joined us for the Book of Boba Fett discussion, and one of them basically is the reason that I do Star Wars Comics in Canon. So I introduced to you guys both Ben of Star Wars Timeline and also Dave Horrocks of Comics in Motion, VHS Strikes Back, and a whole other list of other podcasts he's involved with. So let's get things moving straight away. So Dave, hello. Well, hello there. How are you doing? And also, what have you thought of Kenobi from episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4? So before the one that just came out today.
Didn't we discuss episode 2?
Yeah, but
I've been on before, but okay.
You have, but obviously episode 3 and the whole kind of thing together, because you'll be able to just repeat, whereas Ben is going to give us a bigger answer because we haven't heard from him yet.
Got it. Yeah, it was actually episode 3, wasn't it? That was the episode I remember now.
Yeah.
Too many podcasts. No, so brilliant. So appreciate you bringing me on again, Mike, and it was great to be on with Ben and finally meet Ben as well, because I've heard him on your channel and everything. I just love this series. I love the characters. I love being immersed in this world. I'm aware of some of the noise and some of the nonsense, but basically I'm not interested in it. Just fuck you. If you like it, enjoy it with me. If you don't, fuck off and watch something else. Don't bitching about all this, that, and the other. So, no, I've been really enjoying it. I do think, it's almost been a little bit of a bell curve, hasn't it? I can't help but compare everything now to episode 3, because the joy that I felt in that episode is just, I can't, the only thing that's, probably surpassed it was the finale for Mandalorian season 2, just in terms of just being a kid again and just thinking, oh, wow. So, I think it's tailed off a bit. It's not quite gone the way I thought it would, but that's fine. I didn't particularly bring loads of baggage with it, but I'm intrigued now, especially the way the episode has finished off. Again, when it was on last time, I just said, I need this to make sense with what we saw in Rogue One, with what we saw in A New Hope. I need it to make sense. I don't want to be thinking, well, hang about, that doesn't make that bit of dialogue between Ben Kenobi and Darth Vader, if they've had all this history, and I'm sure it will. They've got enough talented writers on this, enough people who are challenging, and know the canon a lot more than I do. So I'm sort of confident, but there's a tiny little voice in my head saying, no, that conversation is not going to make sense if they're going to show me something in the finale. But no, fingers crossed that doesn't happen. Yeah,
very, very interesting perspective there. And so, Ben, I know that you are slightly more critical of the Kenobi show, but, you still enjoy it. I like your perspective on Star Wars, even though you, even when you are critical of things, like I have been, not as much, but you still don't disparage anyone who enjoys it. So, Ben, please tell us what you've thought so far of the Kenobi series.
First, Mike, it's a pleasure to be on the channel again and just speak to you about Star Wars. I love the exchanges of ideas that you and I have. And Dave, it's a pleasure to meet you as well. I can't wait to hear your thoughts, guys. I enjoy the fact that you're enjoying this, but I have quite a different take on this. And I suspect Dave and I will have a very stimulating conversation. So, it's, as you know, Mike and Dave, since you're chiming in, I'll touch upon this a little bit. I had a very bittersweet relationship with Star Wars prequels when they came out in 1999. And my biggest problem with that was just the presentation, how the story was delivered. Not as much as the content itself, even though it felt quite incongruous with the original trilogy and the lore and the canonical ideas that George Lucas established there. For a lot of fans, my generation, obviously not everyone, but a certain bit of fans felt like George Lucas was quite a different person, a different man with a different set of ideas who wanted to return to his sandbox and play around more with it. Now we skip forward to Disney era Star Wars, and where I was overwhelmingly positive of all the Star Wars animation, even Resistance, which I feel it's one that doesn't sit well with necessarily Star Wars universe, but still a highly produced show with a good story and a good narrative. Where the live action aspect of it has felt very, very offbeat to me. It feels like it's a very passionate and dedicated set of filmmakers playing around in George Lucas's toy box, but not a lot of them grasp it, and not of them have the necessary level of skill to make Star Wars feel not competent, but special again. And now we come to the Kenobi show, where I had a very reserved expectation of it. I said, well, this was my reaction to Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett, all of these shows that are not necessarily poor. I can't call them bad, but they're not good either. Just a mediocrity to me. And I said, okay, let's see what this Kenobi show does. And as a Star Wars original trilogy fan, I never quite considered myself a purist. I didn't need this particular show to tie in perfectly, seamlessly with the original trilogy. If there are some story, issues going on there, some inconsistencies, I don't mind it. My only priority was to see a show that is within its own scope, is consistent, strong, good storytelling and filmmaking first, and good Star Wars second, if that makes any sense. And what I'm finding here is Deborah Chow directing being very much in line with what I saw in Mandalorian. I feel that a lot of it is on the surface. It's visual. It grabs you with familiar canonical imagery that it's instantly accessible. And guys, not to demean prequel fans in any way, Mike, you know how much I respect you. I enjoy and love inviting prequel fans to the show. And I don't mean to say it in a derogatory way as well. But the moment that I started watching Kenobi show, from the early moments, it felt like prequels. It felt like it's going to be something that prequel fans will easily embrace and enjoy. And I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, because it's sometimes you react to things that are not necessarily strong filmmaking, like Akira Kurosawa level filmmaking, but just gives you joy and fun to return to that world, like David said, and have fun and explore these characters and just have a good time and not take it all too seriously and to heart and be jaded on Twitter and social media all over the place. Oh my God, they're ruining Star Wars again. So it pretty much, the previous 4 episodes fell into the line of being predictable, on the surface, not very deep, kind of like one-off entertainment, with episode 4 being the weakest one.
Right. I see what you're saying. I mean, I obviously, I do enjoy Kenobi. I understand your criticisms, and I don't necessarily disagree. I do feel like it feels, for me, though, it feels in between prequels and original trilogy, more so episode 4, because that is somewhat the roughest. There's elements of that don't fit into the other ones quite as well. It's got that kind of, I think Kenobi fits well into that. And I think for me, Kenobi works well with the visuals, obviously. And I had a note in this episode specifically, the music is incredible for the whole thing. I know the score is done by John Williams, the main theme rather, and the rest of the music is done by Natalie Holt, who did Loki and a few other things. And she's great. But I found that for me, on episode 3, after that, I was like, this is going, as Dave was saying before, this is going exactly how I want it to go. This is dark, this is brutal, it's been a build. I got the Kenobi stuff to begin with, which is quite emotional, and it connects well with the prequels and has its own thing going. But then episode 4, I was like, okay, it's kind of plodding along. It doesn't feel like this. There will come some cool moments, but once again, there were just kind of bits that are a bit like, okay, but I'm still enjoying it, still having a good time. And then this episode as well, I did really enjoy again, but I'm understanding where you're coming from. I think that I'm just a lot more forgiving. So although I agree with many elements of what you said, not every part, obviously I enjoy The Mandalorian a lot more than you did, and I think The Mandalorian did an incredible job at so many things. I just think that there are elements that could have been improved on in certain ways, but the Book of Boba Fett, I think, is an amplification of what was wrong with The Mandalorian. Boba Fett is kind of the poster child for those issues in some ways. But I really enjoyed Kenobi. I think it is really good, but it is kind of doing, as what Dave said as well, it is going up and coming down again. And it's like, as Star Wars fans, and I think Tonya maybe said this, and someone else said it as well, it's just, we just want it to be really, really amazing, like the whole way through. We want it to be like the Batman or
Feels special again.
Joker, or yeah, exactly, as you say, Ben. We want it to be that where it goes is it's just we don't have to kind of make excuses for why it's good. You know, you watch certain amazing movies and you don't go, oh yeah, this was phenomenal. Oh, but this thing didn't work and this thing didn't work. You don't generally do that as much. But with the prequels and the sequels and all new Star Wars content, I'm finding myself being a Star Wars apologist so much because there are so many little things that come up and it's just like, you know what fans are like, you know about this, you know about that. Why did you add the coat scene in? Did someone not think of that? That's really going to, you know, so it's kind of a mixed bag. But let's get on to this episode specifically, and obviously it will connect in with the other elements that we've said about. But so episode 5, or part V, as it says. So this is the penultimate episode. So, you know, there's one element of it that I loved, and I did enjoy this episode more than the previous episode, I'd say, but I still think it wasn't as good as the third episode for me. But I loved the way it starts, and you get the young Hayden Christensen and, Hayden Christensen just looking quite good for his age, you know, sort of thing, probably with a little bit of aging or makeup and stuff, but him and Obi-Wan sparring, and you get that sprinkled throughout the episode, and I think that really helps work things narratively. So if we go to you again, Dave, to start with, what were your initial thoughts of this episode? Anything you want to add to what me and Ben have just said, and just we'll kind of go from there?
Yeah, some of the things that Ben was saying there was really interesting, and I'm an original trilogy guy as well. I think I warmed to the prequels more, probably honestly, mostly in discussing with Mike, and I think the content and the storytelling is actually quite strong. The themes of it are really quite strong, and in the last few years, been a whole lot more relevant than they were when I watched them. But the aesthetic was just it looked too glossy for me. So that's where I center myself. The first thing I thought, Mike, when I saw them dueling and we're back on Coruscant, was to think of you. Quite honestly, I thought you will be a pig in shit watching this. You're a prequels child, you know. You loved it, and I thought Mike your mind must be blown. So for me, again, I can appreciate the prequels, but it's not my love. It's not my trilogy. It's funny because I think some of this looks great, but the de-aging technology now is so good when movies have the budget. You know, you see the likes of Michael Douglas, and he looks great. He looks like he's back in Romancing the Stone or something, and it's seamless. And you're like, holy shit, this is, you know, even the Reface app that you do, some of those look unbelievable. And I just thought it was weird that they just didn't even try with Hayden Christensen. You know, they did it with Mark Hamill as well, didn't they, in Mandalorian? Yeah. So I just found it weird. He looks great for his age, but it sort of took me out of it a little bit. It's like, you haven't even tried to de-age him, you know, or maybe just give him a little bit of blusher or something. But that's it. But no, I thought it was good, and I thought the way it knit into the story was great because, you know, it's constantly going back to this lesson that Obi-Wan's trying to teach Anakin about being impatient, being impulsive, and, you know, not having to win through direct brute force. And you see that plays out, and you know, Obi-Wan's still not trying to teach him the lesson. He's still coming from the same place, but Anakin hasn't grown. He's still doing exactly the same things as when he was that younger Padawan.
Mm. Yeah, very good perspectives there, and intriguing. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said. Ben, what about you? What do you think of sort of the episode in general, and also some of the things Dave said, and about the sort of Kenobi-Anakin connection with their sparring?
A little frustrating. The whole episode, just one even pulse line throughout the whole episode. I was grasping to find things that I like, and this is where a place you don't want to be. When you're selective about things that you like, once again, I'm thrown into my 1999 experience, where for quite a few years, enjoying episode 2 a little bit better than episode 1 and enjoying episode 3, the most of them all, I was still in denial, trying to convince myself that these are good movies that just I don't understand. And I need to level up in rank to try to tell myself that it's good filmmaking. And, you know, arguing with all of these bitter film school fans, like, oh, it's crap, it's this and that. But anyway, yeah, in this particular episode, once again, I'm returning to this mantra that I'm going to repeat. It felt like prequel stuff. The moment that we see Obi-Wan Kenobi, I understand what the episode is doing intellectually. I understand where Deborah Chow's headspace is where they're trying to do with this episode. I understand the passion into acting that Ewan McGregor does and Hayden Christensen. I'm so happy that both of them returned, to reprise their roles. But aside from the fact of trying to connect the dots, like intellectually, what the movie is supposed to do is lie to you or show for 40 minutes or 2 hours. And lie to you so good that you don't think about it. You live with these characters for 50 minutes. And I can't honestly bring myself to say that I lived with these characters because every moment that felt right, there was a follow-up moment next to it that felt off. And it's like a warped vinyl record that's just like, and you don't hear the music. It's all over the place. The fight itself begins, and immediately I understand what they're doing. And if you watch a lot of cinema outside of Hollywood, outside of like popular AAA cinema, and you kind of like understand the tropes, visually you pick up on the language, like, okay, parallel storytelling. You're gonna have this episode versus the past versus the real time, the fight of the minds, right? Not quite what we speculated or imagined it to be. I thought the idea itself was good, that Vader tries to outsmart Kenobi, and he employs his little henchman and plays her as a trump card as well. Kenobi on his end also tries to play into it. That was interesting in kind of like thinking on like, okay, this is what they went for. As far as the execution goes, this episode, just like the rest of the show, feels like a really expensive fan film. From folks who are parading these Star Wars puppets, so to speak, but they don't understand the heart and soul of it. It's just my take. Nobody needs to agree with me. And like Dave said, I'm kind of, when I criticize something, look, you look at a piece of work like Star Wars, you criticize it, and then you move the fuck on. Don't dwell on it. Don't cry. Don't argue opinions. Don't argue something that stays in a person's heart. Because if you're a kid who grew up with these films and they mean the world to you, and all you need to see is Vader flipping a starship and it's enough for you, who am I to tell you otherwise? Who am I to tell you to give you a PowerPoint presentation of filmmaking? It doesn't matter. In the greater scheme of things, all art is about communicating an idea and how the receiver, how the audience feels about that idea. If the feeling is good, yes, there is established, canonical filmmaking theories and things that work and don't work. And you could arguably dispassionately look at a piece of work and say, well, this works. This person understands the film school. This person doesn't. You sort of, I trained my mind to kind of toss that out of the window because critically, no Star Wars live action show holds under that kind of stress, under that criticism. It falls apart. It's juvenile compared to Star Wars original trilogy. But then you say, well, hold on a second. How about in comparison to everything else? Well, what other trilogy is like original Star Wars trilogy? There's none. So there's this conundrum, there is this battle inside that goes, what do I do? Am I being too critical, or is it time for me to goodbye, part ways with Kenobi and Star Wars and not watch it anymore? No, I'm still there. I'm on board. Feed me, give me, tell me the story, what is happening here. Maybe I'll enjoy it, maybe I'll not. And with this episode, again, I was grasping at straws. I'm like, Dan, please find something that you'll enjoy. And I barely could find anything.
Interesting. What do you think about that, Dave?
It is interesting. I'm trying to think now. So I enjoyed the episode, clearly more than men. And part of it is because of the fan service. So you mentioned about Vader, right. You see just how powerful he is when he's holding that ship back, and we've seen it in some of the comics, like that Charles Soule run where you just see his power going up and up and up. And so I said it on about episode 3, I never thought we'd get James Earl Jones playing Darth Vader or voicing Darth Vader again. And so to just get that just fills me with this kiddish joy, and so there doesn't have to be anything sophisticated. And I think, for me at least, at its core, that original trilogy is tremendously simple. It's basically the good guys versus the bad guys, and I love it. And part of the reason I went on the same journey as you, by the way, with the prequels. I came out of Phantom Menace 99, and I was like, yeah, I think I liked it. And then I was trying to convince myself for ages.
Yeah.
And did that with the whole trilogy. But but with what you said, it does make me think, because So this last weekend, went to see Top Gun Maverick. I won't spoil anything, but I tell you what, it is an emotional roller coaster. And if you've got any of the nostalgia, it ticks off the nostalgia. It makes you emotional. It makes you smile. It makes you laugh. It makes you feel like, you're wiping the tears out your eyes, and everything. It did all of that. Whereas this series hasn't, well, apart from episode 3, again, just that, and that's just for the simple James Earl Jones and Vader being a badass. It hasn't really done that. And I would say even Mandalorian, the finale for season 2 as well, the emotion that just poured out of me with that final scene, which, we all know what I'm talking about, but I won't spoil it. So, yeah, you're right. It's kind of like it's not hit those heights yet. And I guess with a penultimate episode, you typically would expect to see some stronger emotional beats there.
I think what's interesting is, although when I watched this show, I was most emotional almost in the first episode and then the third. It was the first because I was like, Kenobi's like one of my favorite characters in cinema history. Never thought I'd see Ewan McGregor live action. Again, obviously, Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan, although I think most people in their heads, when you think Obi-Wan now, before the show even aired, I think most people, even if they weren't that much of a fan of the prequels, Ewan McGregor's what people would often see. But even though, the original one is obviously Alec Guinness. But for me, seeing him live action initially, I was like, oh my God, and he's like down on his luck, it's very emotional. And then you get the few middle episodes that aren't as much. And 3, I thought really hit for me. I thought the bit with Vader and Kenobi, I think is one of the best things in Star Wars since we're in the new whole canon. It's one of those moments where I just think it's so brilliant and so well done. I love that part. Although I love that bit, I think that when you compare, I think the issue that 3 of us have are that we've seen Clone Wars and Rebels. Now, I will not spoil Rebels because I encourage anyone who's ever seen anything to watch it. I think that Rebels is still infinitely better than Kenobi. By so far, it's like head and shoulders above, which I think is obviously how Ben views the original trilogy above the rest of Star Wars, which I totally understand. I know you also love Clone Wars and Rebels and Bad Batch, but like for me, it's like, original trilogy is probably objectively the best movies and are better made than the prequels. But for me, I enjoy watching the prequels a bit more because of there's certain moments which for me hit the heights that that the originals do have, but emotionally don't hit for me in the same way. The animated shows are different because in Clone Wars especially, and in Clone Wars to some extent, but then especially in Rebels for me, so much emotion. There's one episode of Rebels, all I'll say is the name, Jedi Knight. I won't say anything else that happens in it. It is the most emotional I've ever been watching Star Wars ever, on top of everything. So it's weird that the animated shows seem to be able to write more in-depth stories that kind of link what Ben said, surface level. Like Mandalorian, when Series 1 came out, I've said it many times, I really enjoyed it. Series 1's great, but it's not, when people go, oh my God, is it the best Star Wars ever? I was like, no, not even close. It's not. It's like, of all the Star Wars content I've consumed, watched, read, comics and stuff and shows, I'd say Mandalorian's like in the middle. Series 2 is a bit higher. I think Series 2 is maybe in the top third, maybe, I guess. I'd say it's in the top half, but whereabouts, I'm not really sure. Compared to the heights of Clone Wars, the heights of even Bad Batch, the heights of Rebels, like there are moments, and the prequels where there's moments in these things which are above. And so I think that although Kenobi, I am really enjoying it, I wanted this to be, and I said it with you, Ben, in our sort of pre-discussion show, I wanted Kenobi to be the kind of show that's so good, I just want to rewatch it. And although I've enjoyed all the Marvel shows and I've enjoyed all of the Star Wars shows, there haven't really been any that I'm like, I need to watch all of this again. There's a couple of episodes, like in Mandalorian, there's the episode with, minor spoiler, but Ahsoka being in it. That episode for me is one of the heights. I think the finale of Mandalorian Series 2, I know that you are critical of it, Ben, which is fair, but I'm with Dave. For me, it really, really hits. But as a show, I think there's probably only 4 episodes of Mandalorian that I'm like, yeah, top tier. The Bo-Katan one's pretty cool as well, which minor spoiler, but regardless, those sort of elements, for me, they're amazing and they're great, but the series as a whole isn't. Whereas with Rebels, I go, yeah, Series 1's pretty good, but it's still probably as good, if not better, than a lot of the episodes that we've been seeing of the sort of weaker episodes of any of these live action shows for Star Wars. But you get to Series 2, I think the finale of Series 2 of Rebels, once again, I won't say it happens, but I think that finale, the episode's called Twilight of the Apprentice, that's better than anything I've seen in live action. Maybe even it might be close to the aforementioned Ahsoka part and the finale of Mandalorian Series 2. I think they're close-ish, but I still think that finale outshines everything we've had in live action. I think us as Star Wars fans, when you read some of the old Legend stuff and some of the, Charles Soule comics, and there's certain bits of the canon and Legend stories that are so good, and the animated shows hit that as well. So we're all, it's a little bit of that. I wish the live action was hitting the heights of the animated, if you know what I mean.
I think it's a much longer form of storytelling, though, isn't it? I mean, I when you were telling me about Clone Wars, because I'd watched the movie, and I was like, "You're fucking kidding me! I'm not watching that series. No, going anywhere near that." But when I got into it, and you were saying about the later series, watch those; those are the best ones. But I found myself really enjoying like 3 and 4, seasons 3 and 4, and when it was focusing on the clones really and what they were going through, and their discovery of themselves, despite the fact they're all clones. And I was so impressed with all these different personalities and how they're being manipulated themselves. But because they've got a whole season, each episode is obviously its own story, but then you've got this whole arc going across the whole season. I just think, I'm not saying it's easier, but I think you've just got longer to play with those themes. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times for different pods recently, but I think one of the issues with sequels is that they seem to take what's in the original movie and then they almost do some market research. They get a bunch of people and ask them, what are your top 5 bullet points that you liked about this movie? And I used recently like Lethal Weapon as an example. So what do you like about that? Oh, well, Riggs, he's a great character, very funny and everything. And they take those 5 bullet points and then they put it into the sequel. And the sequel becomes this dumbed down version. There's no nuance. All the nuance is omitted because it's not in your top 5 bullet points. And I almost feel like that's what we've got here. We've got in the live action a bit more of a dumbing down because you want to appeal to the masses. The masses are not going to watch animated Star Wars content, no matter how good it is. Whereas the live action, I think, a lot more people would watch it. So I think it is a deliberate dumbing down of what's in the animated shows.
Dave, I wanted to actually touch upon a couple of things that you mentioned as a very, very interesting point of the dumbing down and the sequel trilogy. A lot of fans are describing as a committee films instead of having that spirit of innovation and daring and thinking into a bold new direction. So a couple of points I wanted to mention, all tying into what you said. The first thing I wanted to say that in relationship to the Kenobi show is that as an older fan, and as somebody who grew up and I've studied film in the film school, I have a BA degree in animation and moved past that point. Be just as a fan of good storytelling first and Star Wars second. It was always there along with other things that we enjoyed as kids. Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, all of that great stuff. RoboCop. I don't ever want my Star Wars to play in my nostalgic feelings, and this is why I disliked Luke. The specific mention of Luke that we're talking about, right? Spoilers free, because I felt it was just a sweet little nice candy given to fans because it's exactly played into those expectations. You're going to see young Luke, you're going to go berserk. And it feels to me so put on and so constructed. That's no great story feels constructed. They're always spontaneous. There's certain feel and energy to it. And I think I would argue that the simple story that Star Wars is, I think is a very, very fair observation, especially the original trilogy. The simplest story is the hardest to tell because you need to understand the mechanics of the story so well that you grab a person's attention and you never let go until the very end. Those are very, very simple things. A hero attains the weapon of power and he has to defeat his father's shadow in order to become a fully realized man. And I feel that in current generation, where the live action aspect of it feels too safe, too audience oriented, and too like playing into expectations, that animation feels a lot more bold and innovative and fresh, and especially books. Star Wars thrives when it tries to go outside of the norm, outside of the expectation. And we observed it in Star Wars Legends, where you would take a familiar character like Mace Windu and put him in an entirely new environment, like in his novel called Shatterpoint. And it blows your mind because you have a familiar trope, familiar character, but in an entirely new situation. And this is where you hunger for more. Comes all your nuance, all the daring, all the boldness, and the novel survives or dies based on the strengths of itself. Now, when it comes to Darth Vader in this particular episode, what I feel is happening here is when you take Vader, a canonical, he is Star Wars in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And when you keep adding on to him his powers, his abilities, his thoughts, his musing on things, his PTSD, whatever, the more that you do it, the more you kind of grind down the mystique, the mystery of Vader that we knew from the original trilogy. As I spoke with Mike before, I felt that it was a huge, huge error on George's behalf to unmask him and give him a full-blown backstory, because suddenly he's no longer Vader that we knew, and that fantasy that we completed ourselves is interrupted. And same is happening with the new comic books. The reason that I don't enjoy them as much, they could be stellar writing in them, stellar content itself, but I feel like what they're doing is with Charles Soule's runs, and to be fair, I have to check out a lot of them before I even speak my mind. But I feel like a lot of them are grinding those particular gears into dust. They're playing too much in a territory that is too familiar and too known for us, and that is why you can't satisfy all the fans, because everyone will bicker, everyone will put in their 2 cents, and but no, I imagined Vader this way. But David will say, no, Ben, hold on a second. I had a completely different read on it. And we start going at it with one another. But when you take Star Wars and you realize it can go beyond the Skywalker saga, it could go beyond this, it's like poetry, it rhymes, utter fucking nonsense. I'm sorry, guys. And you take it into a completely fresh territory and say, well, you know what? I'm going to have Star Wars in the future with Luke Skywalker's descendant, who is a fucking drug addict. You want to deal with this? You want to work with, just like the Green Arrow comics in the 70s, when they started addressing, the drug abuse and I think, was it cocaine epidemic?
Traveling Heroes. It was
right.
Just literally read it in this last few months.
Right. When you do something like this to Star Wars and you turn eyeballs and people say, oh, hold on a second, this kind of is not recognizable, but it's still recognizable because it has all the pillars of what makes that story, but in an entirely new setting, then we're onto something. Then we're not walking on eggshells as Deborah Chow has to do, because she has to honor the legacy of Kenobi.
You both raised very interesting points there. Dave, did you want to add anything to that? Sorry.
No, I was just thinking, because I think you can probably see here, I love my comics as well, but when a lot of the early stories were written, in the Marvel or DC or whatever, or their predecessors, quite often they wouldn't make sense. Take a character like Wolverine, he's so mysterious because people kept writing him differently, and he had this mystique about him, and they only nailed down his origin when they knew a movie was coming out. They were like, right, we need to write one, or else the movie will do it, and that'll be in the public consciousness. That will be his origin. So we're going to do it first. And so characters like Wolverine, the Joker, you don't actually want to know the origin. You want to maintain that mystique. Now, with Star Wars, what I find interesting is they are trying to stick to that canon. They're saying there is one canon, and that's it. And all this other stuff may or may not exist, but we are going to have one kind of thing that exists. Whereas if you look at, like, say, Marvel or DC, they have all these alternate universes. So they just say, right, these are the recognizable characters, and they've got the same kind of traits that you know before, but they're in a different universe. The context that they exist in is different. So they tell a completely different story. So it's just interesting that the traditional comics publishers take that approach, but Disney for Star Wars have gone down this different route to say, like, whether you're watching the original movies, whether you're watching the live action TV shows, you're looking at the post 2015 comics, the animated shows, this all exists in this one universe. There's no parallel universes. It should all make sense. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think one satisfies one group of people and the other satisfies another group of people. I know, like Mike, you love the lore, and the fact that it is one canon, and you're constantly doing mental gymnastics sometimes to make sure, okay, so that must lead on from that, and what have you. So, like I say, I just think it's different, but really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things, a good way to compare it, if for people, anyone listening who hasn't read many comics and is trying to figure out how to think about it, it's very simple. The different Spider-Man films. They didn't make a big hoo-ha about it. They were like, here's 3 Spider-Man films, Tobey Maguire. And then on the third one, people didn't like it as much. Whether or not Sam Raimi would have made 4 or more, another trilogy, whatever, probably would have done, but who knows if people would like the third one more. Then they were like, right, here's another one, Amazing Spider-Man, cool, like something slightly different. It's Andrew Garfield now. And everyone's like, oh, okay, that's fine. And then after the second one, kind of disappeared for a bit. And then Tom Holland came in. So you're like, oh, there's already, and obviously there's a recent film that came out that tackles this. But, before that film, people just kind of accepted it. And with comic book movies especially, Batman is a prime example, Superman, there's loads of just iterations like, here's just the same character as you kind of know, and we're doing it again. And as you say, Star Wars is pretty much the only thing that hasn't done something like that, because in an alternate universe of what we're living in now, they've got Star Wars 17-7, and that's its own thing. It's all those comics that came out at the time, and the newspaper strips and all the kind of wackiness with Jackson, etc. That's all there. And then Star Wars 2000, they'd have called it. And then it'd be a whole new set. It would either be the same characters doing something different, or it would have been more like the sequel trilogy, and it maybe would have been a bit different and weird. But then, by now, they'd have just brought out another edition of Luke Skywalker, but they'd have had some new, young, hip person playing, and they'd have made it a lot more darker. They'd have done like
Zac Efron or something.
Probably. To be fair, that's the kind of thing. If it was, they would have probably done something like that, and they would have done it like the way the Batman is compared to the Dark Knight, and the way the Dark Knight is to the Batman 89 in the Burtonverse. They would have just done that. They would have just rebooted Star Wars. But instead, I think because of the expanded universe, because of people like Timothy Zahn, who wrote the To the Empire trilogy, and all the comics as well that were coming out and things, I know a lot of people actually, like Cavan Scott, got into Star Wars from the comic first. So when you've got these kind of elements of stuff and people getting into it from there, it's quite different. It's one of the only things that, apart from the division between canon and legends, which, apart from the sequel trilogy and then a few Clone Wars things, you can kind of because the Skywalker saga is about 99.9% of the canon. Like before the High Republic came out, it was all Skywalker saga stuff, nothing else. Whereas Legends goes back to like millions of years. It goes back to like the start of the universe and like the origins of the Jedi, and you've got 10 plus thousand years of Sith and Jedi wars. You've got all these stories and all these things ahead, and the new Jedi Order of Luke and etc. You've got this big, massive timeline. And I think that Legends is kind of part of the reason now Disney are doing the canon, because they're like, well, everyone liked Legends so much, let's try and replicate that. And I think
they have
that's
a template,
the biggest
yeah.
issue. I think that's the issue, as you've both said, in kind of combining your two ideas, is that Disney and Lucasfilm, although I'm happy we're getting more Star Wars content, I'd rather have all this stuff coming out that I still do genuinely enjoy, but have it so it's not quite there yet, it's not quite perfect. I'd rather have that than not have it at all, but it is that thing where they just feel like they're trying to stick to a thing. They're trying to, let's replicate that thing. People liked that bit, let's do that again, rather than really taking big risks. There's like Deadpool, in the eyes of comic book fans, I don't think was much of a risk, but from the eyes of the public was a big risk, and it hit out of the park. Logan, big risk. Arguably one of the best films ever made, I think, let alone superhero-related films.
It is. Yeah.
And so you've got these films that take big risks. And when you do that, and it pays off, it elevates things. But with the Star Wars, since the Disney canon, I mean, even like, I think Charles Soule's Vader comics are absolutely phenomenal, some of the best modern Star Wars. But as I'm getting into more Legend stuff, there are some Legend things that are better. But equally, I think one of the problems of canon, and why the High Republic works quite well on things, is that so much of the canon isn't, here's a new story set around the same sort of time. It's, right, here's a story, and about 50% of it is actually this other story from a different perspective, or there's this character, and it's every book that comes out is like, what was so-and-so doing at this time? What was Leia doing in her teen years? And the books are great, don't get me wrong, that one in particular, but they're all building off movies or existing content. Apart from the High Republic, which has only been out for the last year and a half, which is what they're now starting to do with the canon. It's only now they're starting to expand. And I think Taika Waititi, his film that's coming out in the next few years, I think that's going to be the next Star Wars film we see. I am hopeful that that film will be the big risk. I'm hopeful that's going to be off the wall, weird. It's going to be more leaning in the comedy, most likely, a bit like Thor Ragnarok was for the MCU, but doing its own crazy thing. And that's what I want Star Wars risks.
So can I realize we haven't really talked that much about the episode, but I'm really enjoying it. So I'm going to continue a little bit. So with episode 8 of the movies, they took a big risk there. It was quite different from regular Star Wars. Got panned.
Yeah.
So, you're saying you want Star Wars to take risks, but if I was sat in the corporate offices at Disney, I think due to that reaction, I'd probably be doing the opposite, which is maybe what we're seeing. I don't know.
They're very reactionary.
They're damned if they do. They're damned if they don't, really, aren't they? If they pander to the people for the nostalgia, then it's not taking enough risks. If they take risks, then they're not pandering to the people. The more kind of casual fans. The fans who maybe like the original trilogy and that's it. Don't need any more content at all, and just seen that this Kenobi show's on. Oh, I'll watch that. So I think we've discussed this before, Mike, where I don't think there is another franchise like Star Wars, even like the MCU movies that are big in recent years. It's still not as big as Star Wars. It's not touched as many lives. You've got so many generations, that either love whichever trilogy. And, I've obviously gone wrong as a parent because my kids prefer the sequel trilogy over the other two. So, in a few years, there will be people who grow up, and adults and actually really like the sequel trilogy, but that's not me. I just think it's a difficult nut to crack to satisfy that whole demographic of Star Wars fans.
Dave, to add something just on the note of what you were saying, how do you work this theorem out? If you're like a mathematician sitting down, like, I need to figure out the ultimate algorithm, how to make Star Wars fans happy and bring them as much revenue as possible. And I always felt that, seeing the progression of filmmaking in general, like ever since I came to the United States and took a much, much closer look at what films are as an art form, it feels like it's in cycles. There's a period of stagnation, and regardless what the executives behind these tables, all the money in the world are thinking, what really, really drives entertainment is what the audience is willing to eat up. Kenobi will succeed as far as the fans are willing to eat it up. And when that formula is not working anymore, they will be forced to become bold and daring again because it's inescapable. Art necessitates it. It's not people in high towers sitting down and telling us what the next benchmark, the next standout will be. Denis Villeneuve took up the project of trying to direct a film that every major sci-fi filmmaker would stay away from, like hot fire. Like, we're not directing Dune. It's not possible. You cannot do Dune. It's like it should stay a book. It's so revered, right? And then the first one comes out, and I would love to hear a word or two from you, but it literally blew my mind. I was like, I grabbed just like a seat in my theater. I was like, oh, and like just one single breath just absorbed it. I lived in that world for 2 hours. And I feel that as I'm always an optimist, as a guy who is very passionate about Star Wars, but I can very easily move on from something that I don't enjoy and focus on things that I like, rather than just be droopy and dwell on things that I dislike, right? I feel that moment is somewhere about its near. Star Wars Visions has already gave us a glimpse of like, hey, we're actually willing to experiment and play around. And what if it took the X-Men film franchise nearly 20 years to deliver Logan, a one-of-a-kind film, a true piece of cinema sold to us as an action roller coaster ride film? What if Star Wars just needs to get there? I always preach to all of my audience that Star Wars is going through this experimental phase. They're like, they're sort of looking over their shoulder, like, how would George do it? But he's not with us anymore. But what if they like, Vader and the ship and over there, and in the mess of it all, which I think is a good thing. It's a good thing to stumble and fall, right? Because why do we fall, Bruce? And then eventually they arrive at it, and it's just a movie will come on its own accord that we all just grab our seats in theaters and be like completely absorbed by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the negatives, isn't it, with Disney basically owning everything, because they won't typically. I know we got Visions and everything, but you would think if you go back to the old model where, say, Marvel were licensing their characters out to different studios, run by different people with different perspectives, agendas, then you're going to get a wider tapestry of artistic input, aren't you? Whereas I do think it's all kind of narrowed down very much, for the MCU, they'll introduce Fantastic Four and X-Men and everything, and they'll all become very narrow. Dare I say, had Disney acquired Fox many years before, we wouldn't have got Logan. We wouldn't have got Deadpool. But yeah, those movies were massively successful. And so I think you're right. It will ebb and flow. And, I'd love the idea. I'm really looking forward to the Taika Waititi. If he can break out of that mainstream mold, if anyone can break out of that mainstream mold, my money's on him. But I think, yeah, let's see. I'd like to see some different, diverse content. I like the High Republic stuff that's coming out now. So not anchored to the Skywalker saga, but yeah, just I don't know. I still can't help but love it. I just hook it up to my veins. Just keep giving me content, mainstream content, diverse content, fresh ideas. I'm here for it.
I'm the same. For me, one of the things, and we'll rein it back into the actual episode. We won't talk about the episode for as long as we spoke about all the other stuff, but this should be a soft part. Dave, you need to go on Ben's show so you guys can chat about stuff from another perspective. I'd love to hear you guys talk about Star Wars and Dune, etc. But with Star Wars and things, one of the things I love is even when I read okay content, it still adds something to the lore. Like if you watch a crap movie, you're like, people often feel like, unless it's so crap, it's fun to talk about, people just go out as a kind of waste of time. Whereas for me, at least, and I think other Star Wars fans as well, you go, that wasn't that great, but now in whatever area of Star Wars that's based in, that's just another jigsaw puzzle. It's not something I'm going to revisit. Book of Boba Fett. Cool. Boba Fett gets more story in canon. Fennec Shan's really awesome. That's cool. Am I going to rewatch Book of Boba Fett? Probably not. Am I going to rewatch the episodes with a certain character pops up in it? Spoilers. It's Mandalorian. Probably, but that's only when I rewatch Mandalorian, which is normally when the next series is coming out and I'll watch a couple of episodes as a kind of build-up. So it's these things where it's just, yeah, Star Wars for me, even with the okay bits, still add to stuff that I enjoy. But if we talk about this episode in particular, I won't run through the exact, like we started to at the start, and there's other characters pop up in here. Hadja comes back, who's cool. I mean, the actor, Mega made a good point in all the stuff he's been in recently is the same character, which is fine. Tala, she's great. She has a good sacrifice. There's sort of elements in there. This episode I did definitely enjoy. And I still think episode 4 is probably still the weakest. I think this one was above that. But I don't know if this one was better than 1 or 2, because I think 1 or 2 for me, because it was the start, I was getting the feelings, even though the plot wasn't necessarily moving as quickly and there weren't so many moments in it. I feel like it was like a smooth ride up to episode 3. Whereas this one, I did enjoy. Mainly, I think the sparring elements between the episodes are really cool. I like what they did with Reva. I also realised that Reva Eng. I think that might be maybe a little nod. I don't know if I'm doing a Tony in here, but looking too far into things. But it's, I know when I was writing it down, I wrote the pun. Oh, she wanted revenge. And I was like, wait, I wonder if that was intentional. But Dave, tell us, please, what other elements of this episode in general that you either did enjoy or didn't enjoy, just the story beats about the episode in particular?
I think, again, going back to what we were talking about before, I think intellectually, I think I appreciate what they're doing. When we met Obi-Wan earlier in the season. He was broken down. I said I want this to be Rocky 3. You know, his confidence has taken a battering. He needs to get his mojo back. He needs to be running down the beach with the Apollo Creed. You know, he needs to train up for a fight with Obi-Wan. It hasn't happened like that, but you can see that he's become more Jedi as the series has gone on. You know, he wouldn't help people before. In this episode, we're seeing that he's sort of getting his mojo back. He is wanting to help people out. I was disappointed, but I was expecting, to be honest, that what's the name? Tala. You know, the way she went out, I was hoping at some point Tala would meet up with Mando. You know, we'd have a whole Game of Thrones reunion. But no, so again, great part. And I think her story about, you know, she basically saw and was part of this whole horrible exercise. That was what convinced me I needed to be part of this and rebel against the Empire. Whereas, again, going back to Obi-Wan, he was willing. He just wanted to hide. You know, he was broken. You can't fight this beast, and yet there's this Imperial officer here, Tala, teaching him a lesson. You know, she's not a Jedi. She's just a regular person, but she's doing everything that she can, and she's prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice as well to help other people. And I thought I really enjoyed that aspect of the show, and like I say, there was definitely I was geeking out a little bit at the Vader. You know, when we get the whole face turn with Reva, I thought that was pretty telegraphed. I'm pretty sure when we spoke, Mike, you were predicting that. But yeah, I feel like I should have enjoyed the episode more than I did.
Yeah.
And I'd have to go back and watch it again. I'm not sure. Is it the music, maybe? Is it the way it's shot? I feel like that moment when you realize, actually, Reva's been playing the long game, you know, and she's also been prepared to go to great lengths, you know, essentially become Anakin Skywalker, that she's hated so much for doing what he did. But she's kind of done the same thing to get revenge on Anakin. So I thought that was interesting. And that should have hit home a lot more than it did.
Guys, with your permission, I will dismantle this episode. It's, when you're 18 years old and you go to see Phantom Menace in theaters and you're like, just gawking with anticipation. And the moment that you see Chancellor Palpatine on screen, you know exactly who he is. And until the end of the credits roll in Revenge of the Sith, there is no surprise to you. This is what I see here. I see ideas that I kind of support. I wish they came off stronger, but I feel that Deborah Chow is not the director to bring Star Wars to that level. And let me explain why. From the moment, again, I'm watching this episode on its own merits. I try to forget my previous impression of the show, even though this is one show. I'm like, let me just be, as somebody who criticizes stuff on a Star Wars cold channel, and I intend to do it professionally, I have to be honest and impartial, obviously opinionated. That's the whole gist of it. But let me see what this episode has to offer. Maybe it will stand out so much, just like that Ahsoka episode in Mandalorian, that I'll just embrace it as a single one-off thing that I appreciate. As I'm watching it, the stormtroopers and Reva land on the planet, and there is no detail or forethought in how it's being done. Like, you're the Empire, you have the cruiser in orbit. You could scan the entire thing. You don't cover all exits. You just stand like dummies in front of the front door and try to knock. To the point where she tries to convene with Obi-Wan Kenobi and hush tones, kind of like relay to him what I saw from 10 miles away, that she's not really in it. Her heart is not in the Inquisitor kind of like dogmas. She's after, Darth Vader there. Okay, no surprise there. To the obligatory Tala death, she might as well have been rocking that red shirt. Star Trek. For those of you guys listening who don't know, every time you see an officer on a deck of a Star Trek ship, he's going. If they land on a planet to scout, that person is going to die. And, to a show that has surprisingly lacked any sort of gravitas to me, once again, they throw somebody under the bus, a character that barely had any development. Like, oh, yeah, by the way, we need to kill somebody. Because by the end of the episode, that we see Reva crawling on the sand, she's not dead yet. I'm like, what is this? Where are you going with this? Why are you trying to hold my attention for 50 minutes when you're not telling me anything? I would argue that if this show never existed, we would have been well off, because it doesn't present any new insight into who Vader or Kenobi is, because we can surmise all of that. That is all off-screen kind of story that we understand before Vader and Kenobi meet in episode 4. And that kind of that space of imagination and creativity, which makes Star Wars great. Don't explain or regurgitate everything to us. And if you're going to do it, it better be Logan good, man. Because Deborah Chow did the biggest mistake. She's like, oh, but I'm just trying to compare in terms of format. This is what Logan was trying to do with characters. What character exploration? What narrative? What are you talking about? You just have people on screen who are saying things and the plot chugs along. Storytelling is such an art form. It's such a mastery, craftsmanship. There's so much stuff that goes into it to make a character on screen elicit an emotion. And I'm not feeling it. I see tremendous performance from Ewan McGregor. I understand his part, what he's doing. I loved Hayden Christensen in Prequels. I thought he was a charismatic, handsome young man. He channeled a lot of tears and aggression and everything. He hit all the right notes that the actor should have to be a great figure, but he wasn't. Why? Because George Lucas. Because George Lucas needed to hire a high caliber directors to bring that vision to life. Same with Kenobi. You might have had an interesting premise there that, there's things going on within the Inquisitor ranks that they're trying to backstab each other, and Vader playing this long game, and he's using them as pawns. The way that she gets her badge as a Grand Inquisitor, once again, completely nullifies her as a person. You wouldn't question that for a bit. What have you accomplished to earn it? Wouldn't you be suspicious? Maybe Vader can read into my mind and suspect that I plan to betray and kill him. It's juvenile. It's once again, we're returning to my comparison to YouTube Star Wars fan videos that you would expect. They're okay, it's people practicing their filmmaking muscles, and they're trying to put together a story. Okay, give them a little bit of benefit of a doubt there. That's how I judge, stuff like this. But this is Disney. They got all the money in the world. And by the time that the episode ends, once again, zero stakes. Because one person that should have sure as hell end up dead, she's, no, but, there's a message. I have to leave. And I'm left with nothing once again. And I'm scrambling for things to like or enjoy there. Ooh, look, this nice little piece there. As far as Vader, this is my last comment, guys. Sorry, I went on a rant. As far as Vader being OP, I recognize this is my personal preference. I never liked overpowered Vader or any overpowered Jedi. I like when it's grounded in kind of the Force, we feel it. And then everything is resolved with lightsabers. When they start jumping all over the place and being like Dragon Ball Z power to the 9,000 and beyond, I really don't care. But there, I kind of acknowledge that, Star Wars The Force Unleashed fans, Star Wars prequel fans will appreciate and enjoy this stuff. Ben, let it be. It's for someone else. It's not for you. So I can very much kind of separate myself from what I'm seeing on screen and say, well, this and this and this and this doesn't work narratively for whatever the show is trying to do. But this piece, I personally dislike because my bias.
That's fair enough. Obviously, that's what this discussion show is about. I don't always want people to come on and just be like, yeah, this is amazing. Why? Because Kenobi is awesome. Which, I'm often apologizing for things that Star Wars does. And I'm often, one of the first to try and give an explanation, trying to always be slightly positive. But it is undeniable that there are elements of this show that aren't hitting the notes we would have wanted them to, and they should have done. And I didn't really think about it too much. When I watch the episode, I watch it, I'm happy, I'm in the world. And then afterwards, when normally in these conversations, because I don't listen to anyone else's reviews, I don't look online about anything until I record the episode, then I do this podcast, and then afterwards, I look around and see what other people's opinions are. And one of the things I noticed was that, there was the whole coat thing. And obviously I thought, yeah, that's pretty dumb. But then when you really look into it from the last episode, you're like, that. When I watched the episode, I was like, he's sticking out like a sore thumb. That's pretty. How is no one really looking at him? And then I was like, I don't know. They should have just said he does some sort of Jedi power that makes them like less visible or something, which is in like Legends a lot, and just something to kind of make people kind of keep you in their peripherals, like a power of that. Like that'd be a really interesting power to incorporate in the Star Wars universe, and would help when you've got other Jedis on the run and trying to hide. It could become a thing where it's like, and it's in Legends, so it's not feasible. But instead, it was just like, oh, it's just a dude, really shaggy beard in a completely different coloured, massive coat with someone walking in front. And you're like, okay. And it's just these little prequel-esque missteps. And in this episode, I found that I wasn't on the edge of my seat in a good way. I was kind of like, oh, this is going to get to a crescendo. This is going to get to like a big thing. Then we're going to get the big Kenobi fight. And, I want the lightsabers and crazy fighting and all that sort of stuff, but I want it to be done like it is done in like martial arts movies, like The Raid. Like Rogue One's a good example. Like they don't have it quite as much. But when you have Donnie Yen with his stick, when you've got those moments, you're like, that is so cool because you can see it's choreographed. There's not 1,000 cuts. It's really badass. It's just, it flows and it works. The character of Baze Malbus and Donnie Yen's character, which is Chirrut Imwe. When you have those two characters in Rogue One, they're two of the strongest because they're so interesting and they've got these, the samurai-esque style, the duo of them. But in this, you don't really have that level. You've got these little action scenes which I like, but with the sparring stuff with Anakin, I was like, this is cool, but this just feels like it's constantly nodding to the Mustafar battle. I'm like, oh, that's a move you see there. I was like, this is cool, but this is just a tease for the big Vader battle. There's going to be something new and different and halfway between the exorbitant giant cinematics of the prequel Mustafar battle and the very slow, controlled episode 4 battle. It's going to be, Vader's going to be slow and stuff because he's kind of fear Kenobi, it's going to work like that. And the way this episode ended, I'm like, is this it? Is it just going to be now Obi-Wan's going to fight Reva on Tatooine? Like, if it's going to be on Tatooine, then Vader can't be there. So was that the Kenobi tricking Vader and him being the master and things? And it's like, was this what the amount of press they did? And this is one of the things I give my hat off to Miss Tonya Todd, who doesn't watch trailers or interviews or anything like that. She didn't get anything spoiled for her. And it's like the amount of stuff they waffled on about with Hayden Christensen. And I'm happy he's back. I've been very happy and I've liked what he's been in. But the amount he's been doing press, I was like, this is going to be almost like the Vader show. He's going to be in it front and center, or he's not going to be in it till last 2, and he's just going to be crazy intense. Like I pitched my episode idea last time, which is I want a Kenobi to do something with the Force to dismantle Vader's suit, and that's him beating him in a clever way that's different to what we've seen before. The lines will all still work. It'll be visually stunning. Anyone who likes action will be so cool. It will work on so many levels. And if this is it, this is like, oh, he tricked him with a decoy ship. And you're like, that's the big battle the whole of press has been talking about for the last year and a half. The crazy battle is Kenobi getting wrecked, being put in fire, which I thought was a very cool scene, but then him just kind of running away from Vader and kind of tricking him a little bit. It was like almost cartoonish in some elements now that I'm thinking about it a lot more. I still enjoy the episode, but I'm like, oh, it's going to be Kenobi against Reva on Tatooine. What do you think, Dave?
I think it was a good fake out for me.
Yeah.
Because again, I think I'm thinking of that first Charles Soule run in the comics. Again, when you see just how powerful he is, he goes up against that one Jedi who's been training all his life to fight, and part of the run, you think Vader's decimated, but just through sheer force of will, he overcomes this guy and ends up, putting other people in danger. He found a way to win out there. And I guess when he's bringing that ship down, you saw an equivalent kind of power that you have in the comics. And then when he rips, part of the hull out, I was genuinely thinking, oh shit, how are they going to get out of this? And then it was, like you say, it was a Roadrunner type thing, wasn't it? It was like, haha, we're in this other ship. So yeah, they kind of did me there. But that moment when he rips the hull out, that's when I thought it got me a little bit there.
I agree.
I think I'm kind of with Ben, though, at the end. It felt to me, it went on for a few minutes after. When Reva gets kind of stabbed and there's a whole mirroring of when she was a Padawan and got stabbed as well. And, the Grand Inquisitor has just literally said, it's amazing what a sheer force of will, or what was the words, anger can keep you going or something.
Yeah.
So
Revenge,
why leave her alive?
Desire
why not
for revenge, I think it was.
Desire for revenge. So why stab her through the stomach? That makes no sense. Why don't you Count Dooku her? Take the head off. If you're going to kill her, kill her. And then, seeing the whole way they got away, I feel like the penultimate episode should have left us feeling like, oh crap, what is going to happen next? But then it had me more puzzled, thinking, well, are they all going to go to Tatooine now? How are they going to wrap this up? And so it just, the way it ended did leave me a little bit flat. And, of all the people to find this incriminating bit of evidence, that puts Bail Organa in quite a bit of trouble there, giving away the whole bloody Skywalker secret. Again, it's just convenient, doesn't even come close to it, does it? It's just ridiculous. But I'm just wondering, is Reva going to survive now? Is she going to send a message? Is she going to be redeemed or whatever? So for me, after the whole Vader ripping out the hole, from that point, the episode just got worse and worse for me.
Yeah, and I will say with the Vader bit, when he was doing that with the ship, I was like, this is incredible. I was like, yes, like Vader power. I want to see Dragon Ball Z style power. I love Force Unleashed, want my tattoos off. I love that shit. But I still want to be within reason. You can't have a Sith Lord like Nihilus unless when we go back, it has to be within eras. Palpatine was the most powerful Force user at that time. Yoda was the strongest Jedi. They're in the Skywalker saga, that's the ceilings. When we go back to the Old Republic, when canon eventually goes to that point, hopefully the ceilings will be raised and there'll be more crazy stuff that can happen because it will work in a certain way. But with Vader holding the ship, I love that because I really like it because you've got like Rey do something similar to that in the sequel trilogy, and I like it when you've got someone trying to use the Force to hold a ship back. It's just a level of power that's just incomprehensible, and you're like, oh man, Vader is, and he destroys it and crashes it down, and I was like, this is going to be like a very brutal ending, and then Obi-Wan's going to have to fight him and then beat him or something, and then it was like, oh no, it's a fake out, and I was like, okay, and then as you guys both said, it's like the Raver stuff, and you're like, I'm just, minor spoiler for Star Wars Rebels, there is a interaction that happens in the episode called Twin Sons with one of my other favorite characters, and they fight Obi-Wan, and I'm spoiling it now, but please watch Rebels still. It's Maul. They fight. It's an incredible battle, but the end of the day is that Obi-Wan has to fight Maul and stop him from finding out about Luke. And Maul, when he twigs it, you see it in Obi-Wan's eyes like, oh, what have you done? I can't let you leave. I think it's going to just basically be that, because everyone's like, oh my god, I want Maul to be in Kenobi, and everyone else who's seen Clone Wars Rebels like, you can't put him in, you can't, it won't make any sense at all. It literally will. All people waffling on about breaking the canon, it literally will. You can't have that. So it's like, what are we going to do instead? Well, let's just have Reva there. Let's just have her there, and then her find out about Luke, and then Obi-Wan has to kill her. And it's like, when we discussed it, I think prior in the other episodes of discussion episodes, I was like, oh, that would make some sense to a degree, but it feels like they finished her story. And now they're like, oh no, actually, let's add it. It's almost like a downloadable content for a video game. It's like, you thought this character was dead. Well, the Reva DLCs come out, and you're like, but I didn't want that. But this is the finale, and you're like, but I want a Vader. You've been going on about the Vader battle for so long, and we finally are like, oh, episode 3 is just a little tease. Let's get there, boys. And then it's like, oh no, it might just be Reva. It's like, but you just killed her, kind of. Like, what do you want?
Oh man. Yeah, it's a perfect description. I think I've said it in my earlier video review as I posted it on YouTube. The entire episode felt like a video game cutscene. It seems like I have a completely warped understanding of what character and character growth means in a story. Like, having people on screen talking and reveal information does not necessarily equate to good or character development at all. Sometimes you just have a plot. You just characters show up. It's like, oh, by the way, but Vader did this, but I survived that, and now I'm going to revenge. It's vastly two different things. So with this episode, is just the rest of the show was telling me that, like, hey Ben, if you were expecting to see anything new, I'm not showing it to you, because anything that resembled character interaction, kind of like motivation, what's happening there, that felt like, oh, I'm watching something, I'm in this world, was with Lars Owens and Kenobi. By the way, Reva being present there as well. That moment of tension definitely was good there, came through. And this is what I wanted there. I think maybe I don't belong with Star Wars fandom anymore, because what I'm honestly looking for, it's not TIE fighters versus X-Wings and glowing lightsaber sticks and a dude in a black armor. I'm looking for good stories. I don't care if the dude is dressed up like a starter, a space marine from Warhammer 40K, and he's just wrecking shit. It doesn't matter to me. When I've read Dave Abnett's Warhammer 40K novel last year, because somebody recommended, I actually wanted to get into that franchise for a very, very long time, because people were saying it's a lot like Star Wars. You like it. It has the gravitas, the dark, gritty world that Star Wars doesn't give you. You only get a glimpse of it with Rogue One. And I read my first novel, The First and Only. And that particular novel, the reason I'm making a comparison to Kenobi is that a person told me that, Ben, if you really want to understand the power of these space marines, first read the novel of regular human beings and how they perceive that world and how they channel it, how characters in that novel respond to the environment around them. And that's what gives those space marines the great feeling. It's not their armor. It's not those 5-minute YouTube videos that look raw as hell. It's the story. It's the actual, the oomph in there, what attracts you to those characters. And this is what it's lacking in Kenobi. Like, you see cool things on screen. Even when we get to Vader, like you mentioned, you like your action sequences to be memorable and done like good filmed kung fu martial art movies where you see an actor perform moves for like 60 seconds or a minute, and only then you cut. With Vader, literally everything that he does to Reva feels like a video game. It's like literally Deborah Chow saying, "Ooh, I think this will be cool." Yeah, he should not take out his lightsaber and just overpower her with his force powers first. But then that's not enough. I think that's not going to look good enough for an episode. Then he needs to take out his lightsaber. Like, every single micro decision that goes into this episode and the rest of the show, it feels like, once again, a person who is playing around with this toolkit. It's like, oh, what if I put this here? It doesn't give me an impression that it's a serious filmmaker who understands what they're doing.
Interesting point there. Yeah, it is not landing how I want it to land. I liked the Vader. I did like the Vader Reva fight to a degree, but I did feel it felt a bit clunky at times, and it wasn't enough of anything really. That's what I was kind of. I was like, either lean. It fully,
wasn't memorable.
Yeah, it's either lead fully into the Vader being so overpowered, which we know he is because he literally lifted her up, and just be like her run at him and him just swat her away, and then him just like crush her, like do an actual thing where he's just unstoppable. Not this thing where he's kind of like toying with her, because it's like, is he doing it because he's bored? But is that why? That's how I would view it. But it's kind of like, but you've not really alluded to that in the story. What reason are you doing that? It would have almost, for me, made more sense for the Grand Inquisitor to come in and him say, prove to me which one of you is better. And then they could have had a full-on, like he could have played with Reva a little bit and just kind of knocked her aside and stuff and been like, you're both pathetic. You two fight.
Vader is practical, if nothing else. He's very economical. He's a minimal character. He doesn't say a lot of things on screen as far as the original trilogy goes. And his sheer presence and force of will is what drives the character. And you stand there, oh my God, what is going through his mind? What he's going to do? He's unpredictable. And here, once again, he feels like a fighting video game character. He's like, I have this move, now I have that move, now I'm going to I collected my super meter and I'm just going to do a super Hadouken on you.
What do you think, Dave? This will be the sort of the last points before we wrap up. But what do you think of the Vader Reva sort of part specifically?
If I think of like a great lightsaber duel, I think of Kenobi and Darth Maul. That was a great fight for me. And I remember seeing it at the time. And it was just like, holy shit. Even though I don't like Phantom Menace as a whole movie, that was amazing. This did feel off and it felt out of character as well. Ben's used the term practical there. He's just, for me, he's got low tolerance. He doesn't suffer fools gladly. He's not going to play around like a cat with a mouse or something and just show off, look how strong I am with the Force. And it went on for way too long. You'd have thought, if that was Vader that we've seen in the past, it's just Force choke, like he did in episode 3 with one of the townspeople. It just seemed very, very weird. And like I say, a whole stab in the stomach. Well, that's a bit weird. Why are you doing this? And she's clearly not dead. It's almost like James Bond levels, isn't it? It's like, I'm pretty sure you're going to die now. I'm just going to leave you here. I'm not actually going to witness you die. I'm going to leave you. It did feel very off. And like I say, just not to sound like a broken record, but after Vader ripped off the hull, the episode just got really weird for me. And the only other minor point I was going to make was I think I'd mentioned about the de-aging with Hayden Christensen, and obviously they didn't spend any money there. But also, get some more stormtroopers. They're trying to show when they're lining up outside, and they're trying to get in for Kenobi and all the other people who are running away from the Empire. But there must have been like 20, 30 stormtroopers or something. They weren't really showing the might of the Empire. I just felt it looked like there was hardly any of them there, and it wasn't really showing that force. And I can only think that was a budget thing as well, that they just didn't have the bodies to actually line up. But, I wanted to see legions of stormtroopers. I wanted it to be, oh shit, if they break through the door, they're done for. And I think just for execution, it just didn't visually say that.
Maybe it was maybe it wasn't budget, maybe it was because they unfortunately decided they needed to have some sort of big shootout. And if you have legions of stormtroopers that are realistic in the story, the not rebels but really are rebels, the path people, they would get so unfathomably overwhelmed, and Obi-Wan would just get killed immediately. So they had to rein back in the amount to make that scene work, which isn't how you should write stories. It should be what makes sense and what's the story I want to tell. Or they just do a line where they just, even if it was just something like, this is Vader's private squadron or something. But then again, they didn't fight they didn't seem very elite. So once again, it's that kind of thing where it's like
stormtroopers. Yeah.
But there was a couple of those black ones that seemed to do okay in it, the black armored ones. And it was like, in Fallen Order, they're purge troopers, but they were just like, oh, they're just kind of captains at the front. It's like, right, but we know stormtrooper captains have got like a yellowish thing sticking out. So no, they're different ones. For what? Jedi catching? It doesn't really matter because they're dead. Okay.
You've just reminded me, actually, and I'd forgot. I said it was going to be my last point. This is definitely going to be my last point. But I know, the whole thing with stormtroopers not being able to, not being very accurate and whatever, making Alec Guinness's claims in the first movie ridiculous. But literally, the rebels, they weren't hiding behind anything to shoot. They were literally stood in the middle of the room shooting at all this a whole bunch of stormtroopers coming through, and I just felt like it looked ridiculous because they were just literally stood there shooting away. And I was like, come on, even if a stormtrooper is not that accurate, you're dead within a few seconds. The amount of stormtroopers that are firing into that cave, you're absolutely dead. And I'd forgotten about it until we were just talking then. But yeah, I thought that bit was particularly bad. Also, when you got the fake out bit with Vader appearing, Megan was like, why are all those people waiting to not get on those ships? Yeah. It was like, oh no, they've broken through. Let's all run onto those ships. It's like, but the only plan you had was to escape on those ships. So why are you anywhere else? Like when you were back at school when the bell goes and the teacher says, don't run. Yeah, it'd be panic, wouldn't it? They would be running. They're in hiding from the Empire. Yeah, they'd be running desperately for their lives. So yeah, I agree with that as well. Cool. Well, Ben, sort of final points, and then we'll get ourselves to plug where people can find us on social media. I know that you've got your own show as well, where you've spoken about your thoughts on Kenobi, and also you'll appear on, I think, the Gabbing Gonks as well. So people can listen to your opinion 3 times, which is amazing, in different ways. But please tell us a sort of a final wrap-up thing of any thoughts you want to add before we start talking about our other stuff.
Yeah, I think it's I'm not and you worse for wear, after the show is done. Like, I don't care for it. Once again, it's fully predictable. It's what I expected from the show, and big deal. It's just a tiny bit of frustration. Is like, hey, when will we finally get there? Because I said before the show aired that I will judge it by a whole different metric than I did with previous show, because a lot of rides on this one, because it has to satisfy prequel fans, myself as well, because it's tapping into that original trilogy kind of like lore. But I didn't expect the show to be anything spectacular based on what Deborah Child's resume. Like, I haven't seen any of her work, and her Mandalorian episode was just okay. So I don't think the show will improve at all with the final episode, regardless what's in it. I just honestly feel they did not have a very good idea there. I think it was done for the sake of just bringing these characters back on screen, giving Ewan McGregor the chance to act again alongside with Hayden Christensen. But everything I feel that endures the test of time is first driven by a desire to tell a powerful, meaningful story. An example I want to bring is the duel in the Return of the Jedi between Vader and Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
There is an action sequence that is obviously flashy for its time, very well directed, very clear, vivid action. Visually, to this day, it's still spectacular and iconic. It could maybe kind of sort of say, well, maybe the choreography could have been a little bit more fleshed out, but it's infinitely more compelling than anything we've seen in Star Wars sequels or any live action shows, because every bit of frame in that duel informs the story. Every bit of, like, I dare you, go back and watch that scene. Everything that you see speaks to who Luke Skywalker is in that moment. It speaks to who Vader is. It shows you, demonstrates vividly their conflict of interests and how Vader is slowly resurrecting as Anakin Skywalker. Everything is so immaculately done. And today, when I look at it as a 40-year-old who enjoys my new movies on par with old movies, you kind of feel like, returning to what David said, like, it's so simple. Why can't we have this again, right? It's so simple. But then again, maybe it's not Disney's fault. Maybe it's the filmmaking in general in the gestative kind of like low point that it is at right now, where nobody aspires above anything else than just visual eye candy. And, as a hopeful fan, I'm remained with my hope, with my looking forward to what things to come. And I say, well, okay, Kenobi show didn't do it for me. Next, I'm putting it in with the pile with Mandalorian, with everything else. I'm glad it exists. I'm glad I checked it out. I celebrate the fact there's an army of kids who will rally behind this show 20 years from now and say, this is the greatest stuff ever. Because nothing will substitute how you feel about things, whether it's good art or not good art. It means something special for kids. That's enough for me. But in the future, I would like to see a Star Wars project where they don't rely on nostalgia, they don't rely on fan expectations, and be in a true spirit of George Lucas, where you observe the current and you say, this is where Hollywood and cinema and all of these executives are going, and I'm going to swim against the current. I'm going to be bold and daring. I'm going to give you a piece of Star Wars cinema which you haven't seen before, because it's going to ride or die on the strength of its story and not a spectacle.
Very well put. And I will say, I'll let you both plug your social media and then we'll hang this call up. But I will say, one thing I found out the other day is that the Andor series, there's going to be quite a lot of episodes per season. They were going to have 5 seasons, now they're going to have 3, but I think there's 12 episodes per season, and I think they're going to be longer as well. And because I think the person who director or helped write had some huge involvement in Rogue One, he's going to be involved in the Andor series as well. I'm wondering, my hope is combining some of the criticisms we both had, is where Dave said about the long form with Clone Wars, things like that. Maybe with more episodes, maybe then we'll get into it more. But once again, it's a prequel show, so it's going to be we kind of know what happens, but it's got the ability to be more adult and darker and more different, like Rogue One. We'll see. I'm more optimistic for Andor, but I'm still thinking, it's going to be, maybe the Ahsoka show will be what I want to hit all the high notes, because that's going to be a character we don't know what happens to Ahsoka. We don't know where that's going. This whole build up to the soft reboot of the Heir to the Empire stuff with Thrawn and the Mandoverse, so they're calling it. That's going to be it's going to become the new Thrawn trilogy in essence. When all that kind of happens, I'm intrigued. Hopefully these are just the teething parts, that's what I'm hoping. But thank you both so much for coming on the show. It's been delightful speaking with you. So if we go with Dave, where can people find you on social media? What are you up to? Stuff.
Well as Comics in Motion, appear on as many shows as I can on that, including this one. I'm actually going to be recording tomorrow a movie for the VHS Strikes Back podcast. It's going to be a movie that was one of these Star Wars knockoffs. So after the 77 movie, you got all these different knockoffs that came out. And this is a Richard Corman knockoff of the highest order. It actually had a budget of about $2 million. So for Richard for Corman, it's quite a lot there. It's called Battle Beyond the Stars. Now, my co-host Chris absolutely hates sci-fi. And I figure to watch a low budget Star Wars knockoff is something I'm just going to relish putting him through. So, and it is quite amusing, actually. I mean, it's Star Wars 101. If you've never seen it, I would recommend it.
Perfect. And Ben, where can people find you?
They can find me on Star Wars Timeline on YouTube, where Mike will show up most certainly, because I love speaking to you, my friend. Thanks again for having me. And on Twitter, I am SWT_channel, Star Wars channel, where you can find me tweeting just random things that I like. And we also have a Star Wars group on Facebook called Star Wars Timeline, where everybody can join in and just share your thoughts and say things that you like, things that you dislike. We want to have a relationship between one another where we can say positive things or say critique in a manner that doesn't offend anyone. It's like you can be mature and adult about things and just speak your mind freely. Nobody will censor you. But once again, just wanted to say thank you for having me, Mike. Dave, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Subbed to your Twitter account right away. We've shared quite a lot of different things between us three. And this is why I think fandom is at its best, where we say, well, I come from this angle and you come from this angle, and we get to celebrate and enjoy it all. And you know what? More Star Wars is better than no Star Wars, because when we were less privileged than in the 80s and even 90s, when we didn't think we would get any more Star Wars, now we have this whole kids store, like toy store, that we get to play around with. It's a wonderful thing.
Completely. It's amazing. I'm still so happy. For me, even the worst Star Wars content that's come out since Disney has been okay. I don't think much of it. There have been problems with stuff, like the Book of Boba Fett had a few issues, and even Kenobi has had some, and even Clone Wars. I think the Clone Wars movie is not good, but I still don't think it's like actively atrocious. I'm just like, it's okay, I guess. But
that is one where I will disagree. That is horrendous. It should never be. That should be sent to Alderaan, blown up by a Death Star. that is horrendous. But it's not for me. That's the thing. For it's obviously for younger kids, isn't it?
Yeah,
but
it is. I do tell people, if you're going to watch the Clone Wars, if after listening to this conversation, I'd say people just watch Star Wars Rebels. You don't have to watch Clone Wars. Watch Star Wars Rebels, people. Go and do it. I'm talking to you, Glyn, who says that you don't watch animated stuff very much. Watch Star Wars Rebels. It's amazing. Series 1's really good, but Series 2 onwards is phenomenal. And then some people can try then Clone Wars after that. But if you're going to try Clone Wars, skip the movie, skip all of Series 1 bar Episode 5, and then also called Rookies, I think, and then the Lair of Grievous episode, and then the last 4 or 5 episodes, the Ryloth arc. Ignore the rest of Series 1, you don't have to watch it, and also ignore the movie, it only introduces Ahsoka. But you can find me at Genuine Chit-Chat on social media, that is Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. You get photos of the comic books that I've been tackling on Star Wars Comics in Canon, and last week, and will be the next episode, is the first Star Wars canon manga that is not an adaptation of something else. So there's been a bit of Star Wars manga that's adaptation to certain books and whatnot, but it's called Edge of Balance, and it is really, really interesting reading some Star Wars manga. So it kind of ties in nicely with Visions in a way that we're kind of... Star Wars already had a huge amount of Eastern influence, but it's nice to see... Oh God, hitting my mic. It's nice to have it kind of reverse, where Star Wars entering that sort of medium in that way. So that's what I'm tackling at the moment. And you never have to read a single Star Wars comic in your life to listen to Star Wars Comics in Canon. And also make sure you subscribe to Genuine Chit-Chat on YouTube. Everything's in playlists. So if you're trying to work out, if you only want to listen to everything about Vader I've ever done, playlists for that. War of the Bounty Hunters crossovers, High Republic, all that sort of stuff. I've almost tackled 100% of High Republic content. And check out Genuine Chit-Chat, I've had conversations with Cavan Scott, Claudia Gray, and other people involved with Star Wars, and also Dave and also Ben have both been on different episodes as well. And also I obviously appear on lots of other shows. And also make sure if you're listening on the feed of Comics in Motion on your podcast app that you check out the Ms. Marvel discussion show, which is Rhea is the host of that, and I believe Miss Tonya Todd. So Comics in Motion, we're doing loads of stuff all the time. Every single week there's at least 2 episodes, often 4, 5, 6 episodes getting released weekly. So please, if you're listening on YouTube, go over to a podcast player of your choice, find Comics in Motion. And if you're listening on a podcast app, you're already there. Subscribe, check things out. But thank you so much for joining me, Ben and Dave. It's always a delight speaking with either of you.
It's a
and having
pleasure.
you both on. So much fun.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And may the Force be with you both.
And with you.